Yeah, a warm welcome to all the participants. Very good afternoon. Myself, Dr. Pawan Kumar, Secretary of Pediatric Academy of Telangana State, welcomes you all for this yet another powerful session. Let's gear up and cheer up. We all know that pediatric practice has been very much suffered during this COVID times for the past 1.5 years. And there is one intention behind starting this program. Our scientific chairperson, who is also called as Wonder Woman of IAP, Dr. Himabindu Singh ma'am, is the one who thought that, let us do something for the pediatricians who have been very much affected by pediatric this COVID and all during the pediatric practice. So with that intention, in the March, during her oration, along with us, our President, Dr. Surendranath sir, she has initiated this program every Sunday during from 12 to 1:30. Let's gear up and cheer up without any presentations. It's a friendly chat with all the pioneers, legends of pediatric practice, to the youngsters, how they need to cope up during this stressful condition and how to come up as a emerging leaders. So with this intention, the Let's Gear Up series has been initiated. Almost all it was loved by everyone across the country. The attendance was nothing less than 900 to 1,000 plus only. So with this introduction to this program, I think we have very powerful advisors, Dr. Indrashekhar Rao sir and Dr. Sanjay Srirampur sir. And under the PATS banner and along with IAP TCB, this has been successfully running every Sunday in the afternoon during the lunch session. Now I welcome our President, PATS, Dr. Surendranath sir, to give his inaugural remarks and hand over to Dr. Himabindu Singh ma'am.
Good morning, all of you. We invite you at another Gear Up session. Today, the stalwarts will be Dr. Subramania, Dr. Jijo Joseph, Srinivas Kalyan, and RSV Sri Krishna Narahari is there. We also invite our prospective Vice President of Central Zone, Dr. Radhakrishna sir. We hope that today's session will be very interesting because all stalwarts are there. Wish you happy learning.
Yeah. So, thank you, Dr.
You can take over.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Surendranath. Again, a warm welcome to all the seniors, my colleagues, and all those who are viewing this Gear Up session on this Sunday morning. It's really very heartening to see that we have picked up topics which are very much relevant. So something last over 1.5, 2 years, we have really gone through very unprecedented times. And many things have changed in our practice, both in public sector and private sector. So we are trying to touch upon topics, what's new in happening in all the fields in child health, and gear up our pediatricians with key messages so that it'll be helpful in the day-to-day practice. So this week we have picked up topic, what's new in respiratory diseases, and for this topic, we have experts. We know Dr. N.K. Subramaniam, Dr. Narayan Modi is a little unwell, so he's excused himself. And Dr. Jijo Joseph from Kerala and Dr. R.K. Gupta from Jaipur. So, and I'm ably assisted, or I should say, I'm handing over my moderation today to the youngsters of our Telangana, Dr. Sri Krishna, who's the Secretary of the IAP Twin Cities branch. We know him as a very dynamic young person, and Dr. Srinivas Jakka. So, first, I would like to also welcome our guest of honor, who's none other than my teacher himself, Dr. Radhakrishna from Visakhapatnam. Sir is well known for his academic acumen, his teaching skills. His very
the community needs to have a high level of awareness.
Can you make others mute? Some disturbance. Yeah. So Dr. Radhakrishna sir is a undergraduate and postgraduate from Andhra Medical College, Vizag, from where I also graduated. And he was the best outgoing student of his batch. And he was a former assistant professor of Andhra Medical College. So under him, I was trained actually. So I have deep regards and respect for him. So we welcome you warmly to this Gear Up session as our guest of honor. And he's been an executive board member of Andhra Pradesh in 2007 and 2017. He was a state president of IAP in 2010, delivered more than 800 lectures in various IAP fora, and presently he's managing director of the Giggles Omni RK Mother and Child Hospital from Visakhapatnam. So we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. You are an asset to the organization of IAP. Welcome you, sir. And I also would like to welcome the other panelists. Dr. Srinivas Jakka, would you like to introduce the other panelists of today? Dr. Srinivas Jakka is consultant in the Pediatrics and Pulmonology Allergy Hospital, Ankura Hospitals, Hyderabad. I hand over the stage to both Srinivas Jakka and R.S. Sri Krishna to conduct the further proceedings. Invite the experts of today. Over to you, Dr. Jakka.
Thank you, ma'am. Before I hand it back to Dr. Srinivas, invite everyone for a wonderful session. It's very important to keep ourselves updated and to think of the subject of pediatrics beyond COVID. But unfortunately, COVID will always keep coming back, whatever you do, wherever you go. So we have a very interesting session on what's new in respiratory medicine, special focus on the recent updates with a specific segment of fast forward on COVID itself. So before we go further, I convey warm regards on behalf of IAP Twin Cities branch, our entire executive board, along with Dr. Arjun, our president, and a warm welcome also to Dr. Radha Krishna. So before I hand it back to Dr. Srinivas, just a minute from Dr. Radha Krishna before we can proceed. Sir, over to you for your remarks.
Thank you, RSV, and thanks a lot, Himabindu madam. A person such an that you are doing great CMEs throughout the year. Please keep it up. And this session Gear Up is also very useful to the pediatricians. COVID has changed our lives in all aspects. It has changed our thinking, not only in practice, but in real life. Everything has changed because of the COVID. It's a good lesson to the youngsters as well as every pediatrician is concerned. Thank you, Sri Krishna. Thank you, Himabindu.
Thank you. I now invite Dr. Narahari, the Central IAP Executive Board member from the state of Telangana, for a brief welcome, please. Dr. Narahari, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello.
Yes,
Could you hear me?
Sir, go ahead. Yes, sir, go ahead.
So every week we are learning a lot of things about COVID, and this time I think we are going to learn new things in respiratory medicine, and with particular reference to COVID, I think. So let us have happy learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it's just 8 minutes and we are ready with the first session. I now hand it over to Dr. Srinivas to introduce his panelists and over to the moderator of the first session. Dr. Srinivas, you have 30 minutes. Look forward to the session.
Dr. Sri Krishna, is Dr. Gupta joining us? Dr. Arti Gupta?
Let me just find out. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
you can just begin the session. I'll try to get Dr. Gupta in.
Okay, shall I start the session?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, right. So it's a privilege to moderate the session in the presence of such stalwarts and teachers like Professor Subramanya, Dr. Radha Krishna Garu, and Dr. Jijo, and also Dr. Himabindu Garu. So I think we're waiting for Dr. Gupta to join us. In the meantime, we're fortunate to have excellent faculty as a panelist. And we know Dr. Professor Subramanya, he's the president of IAP Respiratory Chapter. He's held various IAP posts in the past. He's encouraging, since the onset of COVID, has encouraged various innumerable webinars. He's also getting international speakers to talk to us. And I think if there is someone who has contributed to the growth of respiratory pediatric pulmonology, I think Professor Subramanya is one of the foremost in the last few years. And we have, today we also have Dr. Jijo John, who is again one of a young pediatric pulmonologist from Kerala. And he's also, 1 minute. Jijo John. who is again one of our young pediatric pulmonologists from Kerala, and he's also he's currently working as an associate professor and pediatric pulmonologist at Dean of Research, Believers Church Medical College, Tiruvalla, and he's a state coordinator for the Kerala Respiratory Chapter, and is president of IAP Pathanamthitta district, and he's contributed to various chapters and articles in textbooks and journals. And as mentioned earlier, Dr. Modi was unable to join us today because of his ill health, and hopefully we'll be joined by Dr. R.K. Gupta. He's a senior professor of pediatric medicine from SMS Medical College, Jaipur, and he's a national executive board member of Indian Academy of Pediatrics, and also national executive member in the past for North Zone Medical Education Chapter. Has 25 years of PG teaching experience. Welcome all this panelists today.
Thank you.
Dr. Srinivas, before you begin, we have Dr. Ravi Kumar, the Vice President of the Central Zone of Central IAP.
Sure.
Ravi Kumar, sir, for your brief remarks before we start with the first question.
Yeah, it's nice to see my friend Subramanya and Srinivas Jakka. So, Joseph from Pathanamthitta.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's nice. Radhakrishna, the upcoming star of the Telugu Pride. So, after a long time, Sridhar also, I'm able to see him. I think he must have constructed his palace. So, the only thing is he's a Jew of giving a party. So, after this webinar, today is Sunday, I think Subramanya, you are also welcome.
Yeah, you are giving open invitation call.
So we all can join with the Sridhar for a good dinner. So before that, we'll have an academic feast in the afternoon. So night time we will celebrate in a different style, so that you can dance. I've seen a lot of dancing photos of Subramanya. So I'm sure today you are going to make all the audience with academic dancing. So fellow with this, I give it. Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ravi Kumar, sir. So, Dr. Srinivas, you have an academic feast and academic dance ahead. Please take it forward with your questions. Over to you.
So, Dr. Sri Krishna, do we have Dr. Subramanya and Dr. Jijo?
Yeah. So, we have just two of them, and I'm sure these two batsmen should be able to take us till the last ball.
Yeah, we have Sachin Tendulkar and Sehwag. What else do we need? Okay, two are enough. So,
yeah,
okay.
Please go ahead. Good luck.
Yeah, okay. So probably we will start with our young batsman, Dr. Jijo. I can't see him.
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Dr. Jijo, basically the questions today are not something you discuss in your PPTs or webinars. These are the questions which the normal practitioners face in day-to-day practice, and sometimes we feel shy to ask in conference and seminars. So we are choosing such sort of questions. Dr. Jijo, as you are aware, these days you have allergy testing available everywhere, especially in your urban settings. The skin prick test shows specific allergies. So because it's a pulmonary conference, in which asthmatic patients would you consider allergy testing?
First of all, I would like to thank Himabuddu ma'am for coming up with such a good program which is helpful across the board. Thank you for Ravi Kumar sir for being here with us, and thank you for all the organizers for being part of this scenario and giving me an opportunity to be with Subramanya sir, who is a legend in pediatric pulmonology at this point. Coming to the question, sir, one of the major issues at this point regarding allergen testing is the availability of standardized allergens. So right now that is a major issue. For all children, there are many centers which are doing allergen testing for all children with asthma. At this point, I'm kind of not doing it for all children. I'm kind of doing it for children whom I can't get a control with, because the financial aspect is also part of it. So the patients whom a regular control with the regular use of controllers are not being possible, those are the children I'm asking for a skin testing. skin testing is preferred over an in vitro test because the effects are equal, provided the standard allergens are available. And again, there are some parents who will definitely come and who want to know as to what allergens are most likely causing problems. In those, even though the symptomatology is not so severe to warrant an allergy skin testing or in vivo testing, I do offer them testing per se.
So those with poor, difficult to control asthma and where the parents would like to, would like to have some allergy testing and like to know the root cause of the problem. So probably these are the ones. And as you mentioned, the availability of allergens reagents is really a challenge, standardized reagents. Okay, that's very nicely mentioned. For taking on further on the diagnosis of asthma, Subramanian sir, there is a lot of emphasis on the personalized management plan. At least that's what the GINA says, for looking at the phenotype of the individual and then treating them accordingly. I don't know how successful we are now day-to-day practice to get this individualized asthma management plan. In that respect, what is the role of pheno in the management of asthma in children, especially in a country like ours?
Okay.
Fraction excretion of nitric oxide.
Good afternoon, and again let me thank Dr. Ravi Kumar, Dr. Hema Bindu, our Sridhar, Jijo, and we have Radha Krishna sir, Surendranath, and Pawan, and all my friends from Telangana, and all the viewers. So this pheno is basically a fractional excretion of nitric oxide. Basically, it's something like an inflammatory marker. So if somebody wants to ask me what is this, can I just oversimplify, Jaka sir, with permission of
Yes,
you?
sir. Yes,
it is
sir.
something like why you want to do CRP, in the blood for some illness, this is just a marker. So similarly, you can do pheno in asthma, respiratory illnesses. So it is expressed as parts per million, and therefore, if it is increased or decreased, so whenever the exhalation of nitric oxide comes out, generally it is measured by the standardized instrument, and you are going to blow into it and it will give the readings. And this is widely practiced in UK. If you ask me, those who have come from UK to India are feeling little itchy that pheno is not widely available in India. So that's the point. Some of them have started, some of them are doing. It's available variously across the cities. This is regarding availability of pheno. It will cost few lakhs. Return on investment, we do not know. This is as far as those who want to start pheno. What are the indications for pheno? Somewhere when we want to start the treatment for asthma, I wanted to predict whether this particular child is going to respond to inhalation corticosteroid or not. That's the point. See, I will counsel the mother and tell her to take for 2 or 3 months. What if that child do not respond to inhalation corticosteroid? Therefore, is it possible for me to decide before starting inhalation corticosteroids whether it is going to respond or not? Remember, for the purpose of general pediatricians, let me make the concept very brief. If there is an eosinophilic airway inflammation, it will respond to steroids. If it is not an eosinophilic inflammation, then unlikely that it may respond to steroid. However, steroid is broad spectrum. Please understand, it will reduce all sorts of inflammation. However, it is the drug of choice for eosinophilic inflammation. So is there any way I can know whether there is eosinophilic inflammation that is going on? Okay, for those of the pediatricians who are very traditional and old timers, there is something called atopic and non-atopic asthma. Most of the atopic asthmas are eosinophilic inflammation mediated, not necessarily, but I'm telling you in very, very gross way. So if you do pheno, and if pheno levels are out, that means is it less than 20, more than 40, 50? Based on that, you can decide whether the exhaled nitric oxide is in good proportion. That is a marker of inflammation. So if you find positive pheno, you can go ahead and start inhalation corticosteroids. If it is negative or if it is low, then please see that it may not respond to inhalation corticosteroids. And you can even look at alternative diagnosis from the beginning itself. For example, a Miss Foreign Body or something else mimicking asthma. It is easy to pick up. So therefore, it's a good starter. If the value is in between 20 to 40, then it is equivocal and correlate clinically. But if the FeNO values are very high, it gives you very good supportive evidence that yes, this child is going to respond to inhalation corticosteroids, and you can go ahead. So upfront in the beginning of treatment. Secondly, when in follow-up, suppose the FeNO levels are decreasing, it is like another PFT for you. That means the child is responding, and therefore even you can consider that you can reinforce the parents. Yes, look here, these things. But in no way these are substitutes to our clinical diagnosis and management.
Excellent, sir. So if I might be allowed to summarize, FeNO indicates eosinophilic inflammation and the possible response to corticosteroids.
Yes.
And if someone's FeNO is not coming down despite treatment, either they're not responding or not defaulting, they're not using the treatment properly. These are the
Treatment properly or alternate diagnosis is
alternate diagnosis possible. Okay, we would like to welcome Dr. R.K. Gupta.
So we can always ask sir regarding his experience regarding skin testing, sir. R.K. Gupta sir.
Okay. For the allergy testing, sorry, Jijo, I got prompted that it's me. If you ask me, I will tell you only 1 or 2 indications. One is when asthma is associated with allergic rhinitis in practice. That is when you need skin testing more for allergic rhinitis than for asthma. That is one category. If I'm actually oversimplifying it for the practice benefit of pediatricians, when there is 2 diseases, automatically it goes down to atopy and you may need it. If the history, actually it is not a good substitute for history. History is again important, when without history you should not do. The 3 things in skin test, you should select the patient, select the test, and appropriately interpret. If you miss these 3 prongs, then you blame the test for not understanding the test. Okay, over to Gupta, sir.
Good afternoon, Dr. Gupta. Welcome. Please unmute yourself, sir, or even the host can unmute him.
So first of all, my thanks to all the organizers for inviting me. Dr. Himabindu Madam, Dr. Jakka sir, Dr. Subramaniam sir, Dr. Ravi Kumar sir for inviting me. And I'm so sorry for being slightly late. Actually, in my mind, it was 12:30. There was some misinterpretation. So I got slightly late. I was in our local CME of hematology in the Rajasthan. Now the question is very nice question that allergy testing, both are available, skin prick tests as well as the specific IgE tests. They both are available nowadays in the big cities, in the children. So when they should be advised in allergic asthma, means asthma patients. So they should not be done in unstable asthma. This is very important, that whenever the patient is stable, then only it should be done. And as Dr. Subramaniam told that it's because of if a child is having associated allergy, rhinitis, then it should be done. This is the very important thing. Second, skin prick test should only be done, especially when the child is off the drugs, especially antihistaminics like long-acting one like cetirizine or fexofenadine for 5 to 7 days, and he should not be on the oral steroids. Then skin prick test, it's sometimes difficult to get it done in below 3 to 4 year old children. So because the area is less. So this is the thing. And the IgE test should be done from a good laboratory and from either immunocap or some good mechanism, not by the routine RAST or the ELISA. That's done by certain labs. They do it 1,000 rupees. They make the allergen test 1,550 tests. So that is, I think, not useful. And one should always remember that sensitization does not mean the full allergy. That means the child is not allergic to that substance or that allergen. It is the allergy and sensitization two different. So whenever we are giving treatment, we should be very careful about interpreting the results.
Yeah, Srinivas, if you could permit me, it is, if I were to draw an analogy, MANTO positivity is a skin test for tuberculosis. So MANTO positivity does not mean that the child is suffering from tuberculosis, but he is infected. In the same way, allergy testing means that somebody is sensitized, he may or may not suffer from that.
MT. Very
yes,
nice.
Well taken, sir. I think if we're looking at why we are doing the skin test, there are 2 things. One is by finding out the possible trigger, can we prevent exposure to the allergen? That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you're able to identify the allergen, are we going to treat it, or in other words, give immunotherapy for that? So I think these are the two things, avoiding exposure and treating it with immunotherapy. I think in future where immunotherapy will be more readily available, I think the allergy testing will take more place, because that will come under primary prevention, where you can actually treat the particular allergens, provided there are not many allergens, there are not multiple sensitizations, and immunotherapy is available for that particular allergens. So thank you for all the panels for a wonderful session, discussion on that. I think Dr. Gupta, I think, sir, now we discussed about, Dr. Jijo said the difficult asthma. Now we are coming to step 4, step 5 in asthma treatment. You know, we tried all the inhaled steroids. We made sure that the technique is good, the compliance is good. Now we want to give some other drugs. In the past, we used to give oral steroids long term, but now we have new drugs available. So one of them is tiotropium. So, sir, what are the indications? What's your experience and what's your message for the pediatricians?
This tiotropium is a new drug which is available by a few pharma companies in India in form of inhalers as well as the dry powder also. So the dose is 9 microgram is the dose, and it is indicated by FDA in more than 12-year-old children, and by certain other authorities by more than 6-year-old children. So it can be given as an add-on drug in the at step 4 or 5 as per the GINA, along with the inhaled corticosteroids. So in place of the LABA, we can replace it with the tiotropium, and I have used in only few children, and I have found good results.
Okay, sir.
So good drug, and but still not much frequently used, slightly costly, and indicated only in children more than 12 years by FDA, and more than 6 years in certain other agencies. And by the companies, they are saying that it is more than 6 years. By FDA, it approved more than 12 years.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. So it's a new kid on the block. So my next question is to, because most of the questions regarding to COVID will be touched in the rapid fire session, but I wanted to know a couple of interesting aspects about COVID. Like we had a patient whose child had a moderate COVID disease, and the mother came for follow-up. This question is to Dr. Jijo. Mother asked me, you know, we've been reading about this long COVID, and we've been reading about this fibrosis in the lungs following COVID. I mean, we've been reading about in adults. Can children have this sequelae like adults? And if so, doctor, how long do we need to follow up these children?
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. As we are all of us know, the lesser severity in children most likely is because of their less mature viral receptors, less dysregulation of the immune responses, and probably the lesser incidence of pre-existing comorbid conditions. Now, in our institutional experience, we are yet to get any child with a long-term pulmonary sequelae, but colleagues from Hyderabad, Bombay, Delhi have reported a few cases wherein children have had some sequelae. So I checked on the evidence which is available, and to date only preliminary evidence is available regarding persistent respiratory sequelae in children and adolescents. So 3 papers are coming for 4-month follow-up, in which of 25 children, 28% were admitted with mild, 56 with moderate, and 16 had severe form of COVID-19. And at admission, half of them had a pathologically bad lung ultrasound. The lung ultrasound findings correlated with clinical improvement, and complete normalization was seen at the end of 5 weeks. And all of them at the end of 1 month, almost half of them had pulmonary sequelae, and at the end of 1 month, most of them responded, but few of them had newer fibrosis coming in. The problem over that paper was they have not mentioned how severe their illnesses is. I'm assuming these children were very severe, requiring support. The last one is a preprint coming from BMJ, which is from Germany, where they looked at long-term pulmonary function in children and adolescents after COVID-19 from Germany, where they did multiple breath washout, body plethysmography, diffusion capacity, and at an average of 2.5 months after COVID-19 in 73 children. And they compared it to another 45 children who did not have COVID or had other respiratory problems. The results were 8 of them, 11% of them had respiratory symptoms, and comparing with the patients with control, there was no significant difference in the frequency of symptoms. What the paper concluded was saying pulmonary function is rarely impaired in children and adolescents after COVID-19, except the ones who had a severe infection. Now, the discrepancy between complaints, respiratory complaints in post-COVID-19 is much more higher than the pulmonary function reducing. So that could possibly be because of dysfunctional breathing also. To conclude from all the studies, the data at this point is majority of the children won't have any problems and the rest will be fine in a month's time. The children who had a severe infection needs to be followed up for at least a month or more or longer if the complaints are still there or pulmonary functions are not normal.
Okay. So I
But
think
Chakra, can I just add a point? With
Sure,
your
sir.
permission?
Sure, sir.
See, I think Jijo has given wonderful evidences. I will give us some analogy from our experiences with regard to tuberculosis. If you see adult tuberculosis versus tuberculosis in children, adult tuberculosis response would be often end up with a fibrocavitatory or a fibrotic type of response post chronic inflammation or acute inflammation. Whereas in children, it ends up in calcification, recovery, or non-progression. Is that clear to all of us, isn't it? This is how the lung tissue behaves in response to bacilli, but I'm not, just if you want to extrapolate the same to the COVID, possibly the kind of fibrosis which they are post-COVID fibrosis which they are seeing in adults may not be seen in children. Just extrapolating the analogy from the response of the child lungs to other infections. So although we don't have data, probably that we may assure the mothers that nothing much is going to happen.
So I think summarizing what the people, Dr. Gupta wants to say something.
We have around 500 children with COVID in our institute in the last 1 year, and a few of them had that severe COVID also. So, but the actual difference is from adult that the severe COVID is less in the children. But once the CT severity score is high, then it will take around a month or more for recovery as in the adults. But definitely long-term fibrosis, as has been reported in the adults, is not seen, but definitely the lesions remain for 1 to 2 months.
Okay, sir. Thanks for your input. So summarizing what the panelists have told, it's very less seen in children. Probably you'll see in severe cases and probably follow them for a month or two, and then depending on their outcome. And okay, sir. Thank you very much. Dr. Jijo was mentioning about functional breathing problems. I think since the lockdown, we are seeing more and more children with functional breathing problems. So, how, Dr. Subramanya, any clues to the pediatricians how they can identify and diagnose these functional problems without upsetting the parents? Because the moment you say functional disorder, the parents get upset and they may not come back to you.
No, I think basically, first of all, the pediatrician should anticipate this problem. Please understand. See, the functional is always missed when you don't anticipate. And R.K. Gupta sir will smile at me and tell me, how do you make functional diagnosis of pain abdomen in absence of ultrasound or any other evaluation? It is possible for the pediatrician to make out. We have diagnosed functional headaches. We have diagnosed malingering. And on the same lines, we should be able to make out this aberrant breathing problems which can arise out of a functional pathology. But here the point is, it is often the diagnosis of exclusion, anticipation, and typical mannerisms are the way in which the children behave, and discordance and not matching with any known causes and pathologies, and exposure, the history of too much lockdown or too much frustration, tantrums, or there could be some pre-existing behavioral abnormalities in the child. That is one. But however, when we are defining as the post-COVID problems as such, let's take breathing problems or issues post-COVID, we have seen in adults, a lot of them getting exercise intolerance. You know, even though I have seen even my colleagues, those of them who have recovered from COVID, still they can't do a brisk walk or they walk very gently. I mean, even post 3 or 4 months, and this could be due to various disorders. And apart from breathing disorders, I'm not referring here to lung function abnormalities, even breathing. you know, the mechanical breathing part of it is also a little bit affected, and this is known in adults. But in children, rare. But you should pick that particular child how functional cough happens. I think Radhakrishna would quickly share his video of functional cough also, if it is in his laptop. So it is possible for us to pick them up. They are typically absent in sleep. They are diverted by attentions. They are very variable, doesn't fit into any physiological explainable pattern. They may be bizarre. They may be unwarranted, unexpected, and the context is the answer.
Excellent, sir. I think one of the trying to find the pattern, functional breathing disorders, as you all know, there will be two patterns. One is cough and other is breathlessness. And we are looking at the cough, it's a habitual cough, which can be like a coughing, like a severe barking cough, like a throat clearing. Or there it can be breathlessness, can be again because of hyperventilation syndromes or vocal cord dysfunction or sighing. So, and as Sarah said, the most important is absence in sleep. As you know, many of the respiratory disorders like asthma, they're worse at night time and sleep, but child is absolutely fine during sleep, but symptoms only during daytime is a hint for the functional disorders and not fitting into any particular category. Excellent, sir. And so the next question is to Dr. Jijo. We're from slightly moving to tuberculosis, which is a very important topic. So we have people do MANTO or still doing MANTO for various reasons. So you get a child with not a normal but very strong positive MANTO. You do a chest X-ray, and that's normal. So what do you do next? I had 2 children in the last 1 month with this problem. So Dr. Jijo, what would you do? What would you do in this scenario? MANTO is strongly positive. Chest X-ray is normal.
So like Srinivas already, Subramanian sir already mentioned, MANTO again tells us only about the sensitization. So the specificity and positive predictive value of MANTO. One second.
His voice is not audible, Dr. Jijo.
Better? Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now it's better, sir.
Like Subramanian sir had told earlier, the specificity, the MANTO is just a sensitization test. The specificity and positive predictive value of MANTO is limited, especially in children who are BCG vaccinated and has exposure to non-tuberculous mycobacterium per se. Now, the original tuberculin source of 2-TURT23, which we use, the lot has actually finished, and the future is a CTB specific test, which is a next generation skin test, which is unaffected by BCG vaccination status. Unfortunately, it is not yet available in India, and it will soon be available through the NTP program for all. Now, as we are aware, the TST cannot identify from an active infection or latent tuberculosis. Microbiological evidence is the gold standard. If you go as per NTEP, if the chest X-ray is normal and the child has persistent fever for more than 2 weeks without a known cause and or unremitting cough for more than 2 weeks or weight loss of more than 5% or no weight gain in the last 3 months, despite adequate nutrition or failure of nutrition rehabilitation in children with severe acute malnutrition with or without contact of a pulmonary TB case in the last 2 years, you should evaluate for, if the chest X-ray is normal, we'll evaluate for extrapulmonary tuberculosis. And if that is negative, we will always look for an alternative cause explaining the signs and symptoms of the child. So we won't treat the MANTO, we'll have to treat the child per se.
Sir, Subramanian sir, anything you want to
Yeah,
add?
only one line I wanted to just add. If it is MANTO positivity, pediatrician should look at only 2 things. Is the child asymptomatic MANTO positive, or is it symptomatic and MANTO positive? If it is symptomatic and MANTO positive, take the true value of it and then, go ahead and investigate for tuberculosis. You will usually get a yield. That is most important. It's just a starter of the plate. One. Suppose if it is asymptomatic and MANTO positive, it means that the child is having latent tubercular infection as per the old terminology. Now the LTBI is an outdated term now. Currently, we are using TBI, tubercular infection. So basically, what does that mean is latent tuberculosis. Why we want to phase away that term is because latent need not be latent forever. Sometime it becomes non-latent and, get activated. So therefore, the term, again, the approach is changing and it's a tubercular infection, can remain latent or can become activated. So this is the point that we are talking. And thirdly, the group that we were looking for below 6 years, above 6 years and all that is now fine. Last one line, if you find Manto positivity in a child, Jaka, what I would do in your place is just get both the parents X-rays done, because they must be the sufferers. And the answer to the childhood TB is not investigating the child, but investigating the adult in the family, because that's the most important approach and the point, because that person may be having a cavity or a fibrocavitary disease, and the sputum will be very easy. Instead of struggling with the child, my message to all the pediatricians, when you have problem on X-ray and Manto, investigate the adult or the contact. You will get all the answer, because likely that the child would have contacted from him or her.
Very well taken, sir. So if the child is asymptomatic, you can wait and watch probably, but the child is symptomatic, then we have to investigate further for extrapulmonary. The reason is asking is we had 2 children in the last 1 month with the mediastinal lymph nodal TB. So this we can't, sometimes may not identify an X-ray. So we have to look hard for other extrapulmonary tuberculosis. Sir, taking forward on the same question, in the past, I think people, history of cough or, or some Manto positive, we used to treat as a tuberculosis. But I think the emphasis now has changed to microbiological diagnosis, or trying to obtain a microbiological diagnosis or histopathological diagnosis. So why is this recent shift, sir? I won't say it's very recent, but the trend is to get a microbiological diagnosis of TB.
I would ask one question. I think I congratulate PATS, including the person at Helm of Affairs, Dr. Surendranath, Dr. Ravi Kumar, Hema Bindu, and all the office bearers of PATS, because they started this STAR. I am the rational prescriber of antibiotic. So if you look at antimicrobial stewardship, why it is for only routinely used antibiotics, why it is not for anti-tubercular drugs as well. So that means we must decide before starting anti-tubercular drugs whether it is really tuberculosis or is just assumed, presumed, probable, maybe, might be, likely to be tuberculosis. All these are possible from the table of a practicing pediatrician. This is point number 1. Point number 2 is that we cannot assume that the given child is going to respond to 4 anti-tubercular drugs. It is not possible. How do you know it is going to respond? Now, can you tell me a pneumonia will respond to amoxiclav before starting? No, it is not possible. Can you think that it is definitely going to respond to ceftriaxone? But in TB, we are going to assume that it is going to respond to 4 drugs. It is not so. And it is also a bacteria. But the point is, at least in antibiotics, after 48 to 72 hours, you will know whether it is responding or not responding. But a tubercular lymph node, tubercular meningitis, tuberculoma, a mesenteric lymph node, and a lung tuberculosis behaves very, very differently. And it is not possible to predict a response to tuberculosis in all these situations. And therefore, you are going to dump 4 drugs or 5 drugs in any case on a given child. And it's a very costly affair. And some of them don't continue antibiotics for 3-4 days. It's all right. But when you give antibiotics for 6 months or so, you need a definite responsibility. What is the responsibility? I should ensure that this child is going to respond to anti-tubercular drugs. And that is by ruling out MDR-TB. So until and unless you disprove the resistance, you are not going to start ATT. I would say you assume all children with tuberculosis having MDR-TB until proved otherwise. This is a big statement. And I think if you think like that, then you have to choose the sensitive ones from the rest of it. If you have not done testing, it is MDR-TB only. Think that it is MDR-TB. And you have to prove and give a microbiological diagnosis. That is the rationale in the approach. Quickly, 2 lines, permit me 2 more minutes. Tuberculosis is a big lecture. I can speak for 30 minutes.
Sure.
But what I wanted to tell is, the problems are different for a pediatrician and administrators. See, Jaka, if a cold comes to me, to you or Jijo, and if I start an antibiotic azithromycin, nothing happens to me. That mother takes away 1 bottle of azithromycin and goes home and gives for 3 days. We are done. But what about what we are doing for the community? We are creating the bugs of resistance and we are creating the problem. This is the responsibility. I think the point is well taken. Same thing, if a tuberculosis mother is sitting in front of you with a child, if you treat that child as a clinician, your itching is over because you have treated, fever is reduced, that mother is going to thank you, child is going to gain weight. But if everybody starts doing this, what if there is emergence of resistance and what will be the future? And for decades, we have not discovered newer and newer anti-tubercular drugs. Rifampicin is Sachin Tendulkar of tuberculosis for many years, not retired yet. And we cannot ask him to bat forever. It is not possible. And therefore, we have to prove or disprove rifampicin resistance at least, which is a surrogate marker of drug resistance across generation of bacilli. Lastly, tubercular bacilli is not a single one. There are rapid multipliers, slow multipliers, dormant bacilli. They vary in their killing response to antimicrobials, and therefore it puts a lot of onus on the responsibility of pediatrician. If you look at the administrators, Government of India, WHO, IAP platforms, we don't want any new issue to be created. And mind you, MDR TB is an iatrogenic disease. And as a pediatric community, we are directly responsible and answerable to the future generation and community for MDR TB. And therefore, a microbiological diagnosis is a must. Tuberculosis is not a medical disease for a pediatrician to treat. Tuberculosis is a social disease. Tuberculosis is a microbiological disease. Tuberculosis is a disease which has to be with a lot of onus and responsibility on the pediatrician's mind. Don't treat tuberculosis like cold, fever, and cough. And a lot of seriousness has to be there. A mantu may itch, but you should know how to avoid your itching of prescribing anti-tubercular drugs. Please put them in the mainstream and help our country to combat. We are already having enough problems. We don't want MDR TB. Mind you, clinically looking at child's face, you cannot clinically differentiate an MDR TB from a susceptible TB. Both look similar. A lymph node of an MDR TB is same as lymph node of a susceptible TB or pneumonia, persistent pneumonia. And therefore, I'm sorry for taking a bit of minute extra. Pediatrician should not make a clinical diagnosis of tuberculosis. It is only starting point. Diagnosis of tuberculosis is always and should be a microbiological diagnosis.
Thank you, sir. Points well taken, sir. Summarizing, we need to do, because one is to confirm the diagnosis of TB, exclude alternate diagnosis, and also look for drug resistance.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, please, sir.
It's excellent explanation by Dr. Subramaniam. TB is so close to his heart that he has given every explanation to this. Just I want to add that overdiagnosis and underdiagnosis, both are big problems. In the field periphery, many of our colleagues and RMPs are overdiagnosing. Every patient they are giving ATT only on the basis of MT or the prolonged fever. And believe me, every bacterial infection also will improve after ATT because these are antibiotics. So child will show improvement. And second, that will lead to certain problems. And it is simple to start. It's difficult to stop. Patient comes to us with 1 month of ATT, 2 months of ATT. It's very difficult to stop. And third, as he told that MDR TB, one should always suspect MDR TB. And for which the microbiological confirmation is needed. Initially, when NTP guidelines came, it became very difficult for us to diagnose in every case, to send gastric aspirate so many times, to try for this. But nowadays, it is a standard protocol. And we find that whenever, if we are getting MDR TB, then we can treat the child very well. So it's very important. And I just want to share one thing. Then 180 million patients died in last year. We are worrying about COVID, but TB is similar. 180 million patients died from TB last year.
Point well taken, sir. So TB very important as a chronic problem, but coming to acute problem, foreign body again is a very big problem in children. My question to Dr. Jijo is, nowadays with the easy availability of CT, many pediatricians, especially in our area, they're getting a CT with virtual bronchoscopy to diagnose foreign bodies. And we saw 2 cases missed recently by this thing. What is your view on using that for the diagnosis of foreign body.
Dr. Srinivas, last question after this.
Yeah, one more question? Or this is the last one?
12:50, last question.
Oh,
I'll take
okay.
up the rest of it. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
If a respiratory foreign body is suspected, the best thing to do is to stabilize the child and refer to a center which has the expertise to remove it. Unfortunately, many doctors advise a CT chest with a virtual bronchoscopy, especially if the child is stable. Now, not only does it cause unnecessary exposure to the radiation, and a false negative result can lead to complacency, just like how Srinivas told, from both the doctors and the parents' side, which in turn could lead out to be fatal or lead to permanent damage. The major reason for false negative result is because very few centers are doing chest CTs with controlled ventilation, and the CT reporting skills vary from radiologist to another. Now, if you look at papers, the sensitivity will be very high, 85 to 97% sensitivity with virtual bronchoscopy. But personally, I strongly advise not to go for a CT. You're clinically suspecting a foreign body. You have a chest X-ray. Even if the X-ray is normal, you feel there is a foreign body, kindly refer to a center. Every pediatrician should have the number of the closest center where they can send a child for bronchoscopy. It is always it's a happy thing to get a negative scopy rather than having one child whom you will miss out to have a foreign body in them.
Yesterday, we got 2 chicken pieces removed from left lower lobe in a child who has come with 1 week of cough with denial of parents' history. So
Yes.
it is possible. So don't think it is not there. You
The
will
history of
never
choking-
ignore.
Yes, sir. History of choking may not be seen always.
Cannot be seen. Nothing
And
will be seen. Just
And other
as
thing
I
is,
will
studies have shown that the radiolucent foreign bodies, like the organic foreign bodies, the pickup is even lesser with the CT.
I'll
compared to
send you the
radio.
video of the father and he will come back with sweets. We'll share it with all so that it is a sensitization for everyone. See, one line about foreign body.
But I
Foreign
want-
body
Sure,
will exist when you think of it, and foreign body will exist when you don't think of it.
Yes, yes.
So
it's
both
very
ways
right.
foreign bodies exist, should exist in
Sometimes,
your differential diagnosis.
History is present only in 50% cases. In 50% of the cases, history is not there. This
Yeah,
is very important.
And
Second,
foreign bodies can be differential diagnosis of any disease, starting from colds to pneumonia.
yes, sir. And also wheezing and pneumonia.
Yeah. Don't say running nose is there, so there no foreign body. It could be incidental that the child has cold. So please never ever assume anything. No age, no bar, no toddler, no textbook history, nothing. Think of foreign body at every point of time and keep rolling it out.
Sir, but I slightly disagree at this point with Dr. Jijo that in our practice, this HRCT chest has got very high sensitivity for the foreign body, and the bronchoscopy services are not available at all centers. But HRCT can be available. So when we do not have our institute, if not having bronchoscopy, then we can go for HRCT, and it picks up, I think, more than 95% cases of foreign body.
Yeah, can I bring the consensus between R.K. Gupta and Jijo and give the message to the audience? So there should not be
Yes, sir.
confusion.
Yes, sir.
So if you think, no, I will, sir, sorry. If you think that foreign body is more likely than other diagnosis, go for bronchoscopy. If you think other diagnosis is more likely than foreign body in a given child, go for HRCT and then bronchoscopy. Is that fine? Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Sri Krishna, I think, is there any time for more question, or you want to start with the rapid fire?
Yeah, we'll start with rapid fire. I don't think they'll have
Sure,
enough
sure.
time to face it. So,
Sure.
so you have a small power break for a minute, and thank you. Thank you. It's such wonderful insights into the vast field of respiratory medicine. And it is very nice that you have different perspectives coming from the experts. And to take forward the next 15 minutes, I have a couple of questions that most of us face. And frankly speaking, we are afraid to ask. This is not covered by even most of these panelists in their sessions. They have very vague answers. And sometimes as pediatricians, we go on to the next question whenever these questions come up. So I have the same batsman now at the crease, now to take up the fast bowler after the medium pace of Dr. Srinivas. We'll begin with Dr. Gupta, sir. Sir, we have all heard it and seen that COVID in children is mild. We have said it to parents. Can you please tell us why is it mild? What is the scientific rationale? Why this virus all of a sudden is very mild and so kind to children?
There is no definite answer to this, but there are various hypotheses. First is the ACE2 receptors, they are less in the children, they are less developed. This is the most common hypothesis. Second is the multiple viral infections are common in the children, and that gives some kind of protectiveness. And third is the immune system is not that developed. So the immune system is behaving differently in adults and children. That's why the acute problems are less in the children, but the long-term problems of immunity are more in children in form of MIS. So these are the three things that I could get.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Jijo, this is about the child. Now, what is about the virus? We now have Delta circulating across the world. Does the type of virus again influence the type of disease in children? And what is the effect of mutations on the child? And all this talk about third wave is all presuming that there will be another mutant virus which is more dangerous than Delta itself or the Delta plus. So what is the actual effect of the mutation of the virus and the genome of the virus on how it affects the children?
Sir, to simplify things, sir, what we saw is in the first wave, children majority were asymptomatic, while in the second wave, many children were symptomatic but not severe. We had many children coming in with fever, vomiting, body pain, all those things are much more higher in the second wave. So the variant difference did make a difference in the clinical presentation of the illness per se. So the severity did change. But again, like R.K. Gupta sir told, the chances of a severity is definitely less. But as the COVID itself, nobody is an expert in COVID, sir. It is only 2 years of age. So as the illness progresses, as and when more variants come in, nobody can predict it is not going to affect children at all, because we keep having new variants coming in very fast. I mean, it is faster like how mobile phones are being released. Now we have the Lambda variant also coming in. So far in the world, there are no variants which affects children more to cause a third wave. But as COVID progresses, we cannot predict whether a new variant is not going to come, which will affect the children more. The answer to the problem is still vaccination. As and when more people get vaccinated, as and when herd immunity comes in, the possibility of mutations drastically drops.
But Jijo, all mutation starts in Kerala, you remember. So you should be more updated than all of us in COVID, although it is just 2-year-old.
Right now,
Thank you, Dr. Jijo. And whatever comes up, anything related to mutations or with recent advances, now we know where which panelists to call for our discussions. Yeah. Dr. Subramania, thank you for that insight. Now, COVID in adults and children, it's the same virus, it's the same respiratory system. Is there any difference in how it actually presents as a disease once it enters the mucosa?
Yeah, it is the difference in the hosts. I think you have told the rest of it, Krishna. So I would just continue the difference in the host. But first of all, I will tell you the host factors in a child which should be kept in mind. One, all of us agree on this point that somehow children and viruses are very good friends. They are not enemies. Most of the viral illnesses in an adult will cause so much of trouble. I will give an example. If Jijo or Krishna gets cold, he will be irritable and he will not keep bed. But look at a child, it will be running nose, but still it will be playing, eating, moving here and there. So I think it's very important for us to understand that children tolerate viruses better than adults. This is point number one. Point number two, coming to the specificity, usually I will give an example of a pneumococcal pneumonia in an adult and a child. A pneumococcal pneumonia is a localized disease of lungs or lobes or segment in an adult, whereas it's not so in a child. It's disseminated or it's bronchopneumonia type of pattern in a child. So therefore, COVID in a child would be an asymptomatic, or when symptomatic, it is more a systemic disease. And we have seen that more gastrointestinal symptoms were also there in the past. At least in Bengaluru, I could say, I don't know other places, but I think same experience with everyone. Diarrheas were more common than cough and cold. So localization is again not a feature in children, and therefore I won't expect that much of CT findings, consolidation as much as that we would find. With regard to post-COVID sequelae, inflammatory syndromes, children and adult COVID, I would give an analogy of past experience. Dengue in child and dengue in an adult, and HLH, all those symptoms, symptomatology, Kawasaki-like things, you can just compare how a baby behaves compared to an adult. Last line. Coming to the pathophysiology of COVID, for those of you who cannot read too many WhatsApp messages on COVID, I will oversimplify and tell you what is COVID, how does COVID affect the lungs. There are only 3 things that happen. It causes pulmopathy, that means it affects the lungs. and it causes hypoxia, therefore it is hypoxic pulmonopathy. It causes ischemia, therefore it is hypoxic ischemic pulmonopathy. Just like you have hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy as a neonatal asphyxia, it is same hypoxic ischemic pulmonopathy. Whether it goes more hypoxic way or more ischemic way depends on the whether the flow to the lungs is affected, or infarction is going to happen, or circulation is also going to get affected, apart from getting a mucosal involvement. I think mucosa, interstitium, and the vessels all are affected, giving a combo offer of hypoxic ischemic pulmonopathy. And if you know this, you know what to do. If it is hypoxic pulmonopathy, do all inflammatory markers, treat with antivirals if at all you can. In third wave, if there are licensed to the drugs, which we don't know, or if it is goes ischemic way, you have to manage the coagulopathy or thromboembolic phenomenon and so on and so forth. I think I gave you a general guideline, the pathophysiologic insights to the management, and this is a rapid fire, so I can't speak more. So I will cut down here by telling that. No, I'm cutting down by telling that look at the way it goes. Asymptomatic full recovery, which is good news for most of the pediatricians and to the caregivers of children. Do not worry, it is friendly. When it is symptomatic, very few percentage is seen, and then also it is more likely to be systemic than a respiratory illness, so be little alert. And when it is respiratory, it is going to be hypoxic ischemic pulmonopathy. It can go pulmonary way or pulmonary plus ischemic way, and therefore when it goes systemic, it can have myocardial, other involvements, etc., etc. So I'm summing up telling you that it will be relatively therefore a benign disease compared to an adult, and children tolerate, children allow, children don't mount extraordinary immune response, they don't localize and create a local inflammatory response. Inflammation is a double-edged sword. One, it helps, second, it kills. So children, if depending on the ability of the child to mount an inflammatory response, you can have immune associated or inflammation associated damages, which therefore from the past discussion that we have seen is likely to have a benign course in a child. This is the inputs as far as pathophysiology is concerned.
Thank you, Dr. Subramania. That captures the entire disease course very nicely brief. Now let me go to Dr. Jijo. In terms of management, we have seen that it's always only symptomatic, but there's always a word of caution on nebulization. See, the fact that it is only symptomatic is very strong, and I'm very happy to see a lot of prescriptions of COVID wherein it's just paracetamol, probably a mucolytic and nothing more. But now where does nebulization come in? Because this is something parents often keep asking us. Is it allowed in cases where the parents are already symptomatic and COVID positive, or worst case scenario, they are able to isolate one parent aside? Can we still give nebulization? Because we have seen such huge responses in hyperreactive airway disease and elsewhere with nebulization. And also tell us what's the evidence of budesonide inhalation in children.
Sir, coming to nebulizations, per se, the major issue, what happens is because COVID is an aerosol generating procedure. So if you are giving a nebulization, especially in a room, in the house, it is going to cause a lot of aerosol production, and the COVID is going to stay in that room for quite some time. So it's strongly not advised, not only in COVID per se, we strongly advise not to give nebulization in any of the respiratory illness. If a child requires nebulization, try to convince them and shift them to an MDI with a spacer and without a mask as per the age. Now coming to budesonide nebulization, the point being is in adults, yes, there is some evidence saying you can try it in mild to moderate COVID to prevent it from progressing to severe. But in children, as of now, there's no evidence to start off all children on a budesonide nebulization at the very onset of COVID. The children who are asthmatics, they should continue their control of medications, and the hypertonic saline nebulization again is not advised in COVID in children and not in adults also during active COVID again, because it also induces cough, and the cough in itself, you're going to spread more and more virus to the environment. So that is something which will be the take home message.
Thank you, Dr. Jijo. So this again brings us back to Dr. Subramania. Before he says, let me reiterate, Indian Academy of Pediatrics latest guidelines which continue to emphasize symptomatic care. And it is symptomatic and only symptomatic, very, very specific indications for very few drugs. So all those medicines that you can't probably pronounce properly have no indication at all in children. So even if a parent comes to you and says, I need this, do you want to write this medication? Please tell them that as per current evidence, none of them work. But Dr. Subramania, is there any evidence locally? I know we don't have recommendations as yet, but what is the growing evidence on the huge set of medications, right from antivirals, steroids, and antibodies, so many medicines which we have tried in adults? Any evidence? And secondly, why is it that these don't work in children? Is there any scientific reason why they are not so effective?
Yeah, I will tell you multiple medications that came in COVID were act of desperation than evidence. This is the first point. They tried anything and everything, starting from vitamin D to magnesium to vitamin Z to anti-helminthic to, I don't think only Gupta sir, cosmetics have not been tried in COVID, except for, facials and all. Rest all have been tried. And this is in a lighter vein. They have not gone to dental treatment and say that filling a tooth would also result in early COVID recovery. So this is within inverted commas what has happened. And this is a panic response, nothing wrong. We remember that we in a dying bronchiolitis child, we read all recommendations, but at the end of the day, practicing pediatrician gives everything. Antibiotics, steroids, bronchodilators, everything. Do you understand? So same desperation has happened because somebody who doesn't want to see their kids and kin or their parents dying, and therefore there was desperation. This is point number one. Whenever you say multiple drugs act in a disease, it means that none of the drugs act well. This is also a story. So therefore, the evidence need not be digged, and evidence is glaring. And when you say multiple drugs have to be used for COVID, it only means that none of the drugs work, even in adults. And I'm telling you, we don't know. Many are pharma driven. Till few days back, did we all believe that remdesivir is going to work in hospitalized COVID patients? And all these platforms we have been shouting and telling that, yes, if the CT score is so much, if there is admission, if there is so much value, if CRP is so much, you should give remdesivir. Do you all agree? We have all been in different platforms. I'm telling as a collective responsibility. We have been very strong telling that the good evidence, at least remdesivir work. Now, where is it now? See, there is always a hype and a fall for a drug. Please understand. And when a drug is coming in news, it means that it is in the upward phase of hype and it is going to fall. And I'll tell you in one line, only drug and the drug which has stood with pediatrician till date in all illnesses is steroids. Do you all agree on this point? Be it nephrotic syndrome, be it rheumatic fever, be it a co-drug in malignancies, be it an immune flare-up reaction, whatever it is. This is one drug which has never cheated any pediatrician. And if it is the pediatrician who should know when, how, which form, and which type of steroid and how long it is to be used. If you know how to use a steroid, you are the best pediatrician in the world. I'm telling you, that's simply because this is the only treatment irrespective of subspecialty, be it respiratory, be it immunology, be it gastroenterology, whatever specialty you take, even neurology for that matter. When nothing works, steroids work. When nothing is known, steroid is offered. And all other drugs are a big failure. And I will tell you anticipatorily, whether third wave comes or fourth wave comes, by the fifth wave, we will have the same webinar in PATS, and we will be coming and telling that we have seen all the drugs and only drug that worked is steroids.
Thank you, Dr. Subramaniam. And it is true. Steroid is like that sword. If you know how to use it, you'll save lives. If you're careless, you'll probably destroy your own self and also others. But at the same time, it's all evidence-based and rational driven. Dr. Gupta, sir, you have a point?
Sir, just I want to add, though, yes, Dr. Subramanian sir has told clearly that steroids have proven the test of time during the COVID. But still, it is the overuse of steroids that has led to so many complications of mucormycosis that has occurred in India. Nowhere in the world mucormycosis is so common, but here it is because of the overuse of steroids in most of the centers that has led to. So that we should be, while using steroids, we should be adhere to the dosage and the duration.
Sir, I will tell you, it is most
Totally agree,
widely
sir.
appreciated, most abused drug also. And
Yes, sir.
it is a drug which has been most criticized also, but yet it is the hero.
That's what I want to convey. Just it's not the.
Yeah,
it
it's
is
correct.
not, it should be used with caution and with the proper duration only.
And timing and
Yes, sir,
duration. is-
like I said, it's just like a sword. Use it, know how to use it, learn what to do if you get hurt, and then it's not going to hurt you.
It is controlled
that
aggression. It is controlled aggression with steroids, which the pediatrician should have.
Yes, that works very well. That brings us to the end of the treatment part. I just have 2-3 questions. I'll hand it over to the next speaker at 1:15. Dr. John, Dr. Jijo, is there any role of flu vaccine and COVID? Is there any evidence that is actually coming up, and how and why did these two tie together at this stage of the pandemic?
Strongly, so there have been some papers saying the children who had got the flu vaccine had lesser likelihood of having COVID. But as of now, WHO has strongly come in saying that this season at least try to give flu vaccine to all children who are eligible for a flu vaccine, irrespective whether it is going to help with COVID or not, because you want to avoid children from getting out of their houses for whatever be the cause, even if it is a mild illness. Other than that, to extrapolate as to a flu vaccine will give protection against COVID, at this point, I would say the evidence is sparse. But there is the one thing which we can offer at this point. So rather than, since the COVID vaccination itself in children is going to come in practically maybe as early as December, the one thing which we can tell the parents are to at least take flu shots for this season, at least till you get your COVID vaccine still.
I will agree on the point that a child should be protected for flu, but I will disagree on the point is that please read the articles if they are from the pharma publications. Please, this is a word of caution from me. Everybody is selling everything, starting from flu vaccine to BCG, making use of the COVID as an opportunity. Please, we should look at the mothers and parents while they're struggling for their bread and tea or coffee. We should not make them spend unnecessarily. And if and only if you feel that it is going to be cost benefit, it is going to really give protection. I am not against immunization. Please don't take me wrong. But don't tell them that in COVID, we should give flu vaccine. So we should not extrapolate the evidences, and Jijo has rightly put it, until unless we get evidence. These recommendations float from the vaccine manufacturers. We should be very careful in bringing them, even if the academies recommend. It is ultimate, the jury is at the table of pediatrician to take a call.
I totally agree, sir. I'll come to Dr. Gupta, but want to reiterate, flu vaccines are for flu. COVID vaccine is for COVID. In a hospital, the bed is for both. So if you want to reduce the hospital load, that is one part of the argument wherein definitely protect your child against flu. There is no denying it. Please take it. It's an optional vaccine and it continues to be like that. It is recommended, so it continues to be recommended. But please understand that this doesn't protect you against COVID. And biggest mistake, don't take the flu vaccine and take off your mask. And it is in no way going to save you against the next pandemic, the current pandemic, or the next wave, whatever. So flu is definitely only for its own purpose. Dr. Gupta, sir, you have a point?
Just that point you have already told. That's what I wanted to tell you, that the CDC and WHO had clearly written that the flu vaccine does not protect from the COVID, but both are the similar illnesses. And if they are together, means child is suffering from both, then the severity is more. So that we can, by giving flu vaccine, we can reduce the hospital load by preventing flu. That is the only thing.
Thank you, sir. The last question now to Dr. John. We are seeing a lot of sequelae of COVID in adults. Right now, we are seeing a lot of number of cases of pediatric COVID as well. Early 2022, do we expect any complications in this subset of kids who have got mild or moderate COVID and may or may not have needed any admission? Is there any evidence coming up on what might be coming up for them later? I know about the entity of MISC, but is there anything specific on the lungs and the respiratory system that we need to watch out for in these kids who have had COVID now?
Srinivas sir had asked this question earlier in the previous session. I will just conclude it. So as of now, from our institutional experience, we have not had children who had having severe COVID per se, acute COVID, very few children. Gupta sir had a few cases of severe COVID. The experience around the world, there have been 3 papers, one from China, one from Germany, and one is in preprint. All of them roughly look at around 100 children. And what their final conclusion is, the children who have the mild illnesses are very less, mild to moderate illness are very less likely to have further sequelae. The children who have had severe COVID, who had radiological changes during the acute COVID scenario, they can have sequelae, which most of them clear by around 1 to 2 months of time. So those children, you have to keep them on follow-up for 1 to 2 months, along with pulmonary function testing. And as and when their symptoms settle down, you will have to, they should be fine. So there's, apart from more than 2 months, we don't have any data suggesting of any long-term permanent sequelae at this point. Another take-home message is also in cases which is the mild ones, as of now, there is nothing to worry.
Thank you, Dr. Subramania, Dr. John, and Dr. Gupta. I hand it over back to Dr. Srinivas and Dr. Sridhar. So the 3 batsmen have finished their innings, not out, and it's been wonderful interacting with all of you. Thank you very much, and thank you for answering questions which most of us have, and being very frank and saying we don't know for some of the questions, and sharing whatever is known as evidence, at the same time being very pragmatic in your approach. Over to Dr. Srinivas and Sridhar.
Sri Krishna, how much time is left? How much time?
Exactly 14 minutes for you, sir.
14 minutes, that's great. Sir, hi sir, Subramania sir, and Joseph and R.K. Gupta, hi. And I thank IAPTCB and PATS for giving this opportunity, and special thanks to Himavindu Singh madam. And now it's a refreshing course, like all the practitioners are had a academic and scientific feast day to day. But as a stress buster, we had given some beautiful breath sounds, and everyone can answer. It lasts for 10 to 12 seconds each sound. And after that, you can tell that. And any about the sound specifications or anything indications, Mr. Srinivas will let you know the things. So this is the things. One second, sir. I will. So this is the first audio clip. These are normal, everything, like including wheeze or striders or snoring or vesicular breath sound, bronchial breath sound, all are. And this is the first audio clip you can hear. Able to see, Jekka? Srinivas?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the first part A is the sounds which are audible without stethoscope, unaided ear. Yeah, this one. Please carry on. Can you play them, sir?
Yeah, I'm playing. Just 1 second. I'm playing. Yeah, please. Able to hear?
No,
Able to hear?
No, Sridhar, I think you go to the left and in the video or this thing, share the sound, some settings you have to make.
So, Doctor, once you click on share screen, can you stop sharing? There will
Stop
be a
sharing
small
and then first enable audio.
sound.
Audio.
There will be
Sir,
a small
as you-
option on the left.
Share screen no kya ka?
No,
Press
Sridhar.
share screen.
Sridhar, then
Share sound.
from
Share
IAP,
sound.
IAP, you are
Yeah.
getting instructions. Where there is mute button, no, there you have to go. Correct?
Yeah,
no,
yeah, share sound. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
share sound. Yeah.
To go to the previous one, yeah.
Yeah. Now able to hear? So this is the first audio clip. So experts can tell, or Dr. Srinivas Jekka will detail the sounds.
Who's taking the first chance?
It is Snuffles.
So,
Dr. Srinivas, now you can.
yeah. So, sir, you're this is the basically very coarse and harsh sound, inspiratory sound. You can see snuffles where the obstruction is in the nose. But in this particular case, this is snoring. The snoring sound is because of where there's an obstruction to the upper airway, the oropharynx and nasopharynx. So that's a snoring sound, commonly caused due to enlarged adenoids and tonsils in children. And particularly very important to ask families symptoms of obstructive sleep apnea whenever there is history of snoring.
So if it is from you, I would have told snoring only. I was passionate about no, this is in a lighter way. No, but when you hear, it's difficult because you can also observe.
Yeah. To be fair, this is the second sound.
Dr. Jakka.
Yes, madam.
Yeah, Dr. Radhakrishna sir also may get involved. Please ask him if you're free to get, Dr. Radhakrishna sir.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you just replay for everyone after you explain, because they will again become familiar.
Okay,
Sir has joined his video on. Sir, I request you also to join this very stress-busting session on the.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sir, this is the second audio clip, sir. Please. Yeah, please. Okay.
We'll invite the audience to answer in the chat box. Is it possible?
Can't see the audience. Sir.
No, sir, we are their audience. We are the audience and we are the.
Okay.
Okay. So, yeah.
Any
Yes.
guesses?
Any guess or you can detail, sir? Please, anyone, any faculty.
No, I
Radhakrishna
don't
sir,
know.
Subramania
Should
sir.
I volunteer or someone else will volunteer?
Anyone, sir.
Anyone can just, it's just a fun session.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can just shout out, sir. No problem.
Okay, because we don't know what is there. This we don't know the history also.
Yes, sir.
This is inspiratory, and
Yes,
looks like it's a strider or a croupy sound, and that's possible.
Excellent, sir. Excellent. Now, Srinivas, you can.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. As Sir has said, it's inspiratory sound. You can see that it is due to the obstruction of the upper airway. In the inspiratory stridor is due to usually obstruction of supraglottic part of the airway, and that can be due to croup acutely, or it can be chronic due to laryngomalacia. This is the common.
So,
Thank you, sir.
We are playing the audio clip 3, sir.
Third clip.
So, this is the audio clip 3. And
So child with a runny nose, cough, fever, and following that, this is the sound. Child has severe retractions.
అన్ని సుబ్రహ్మణ్య సార్ కే ఫస్ట్ అడుగుతున్నారు.
Because he's good at it. Madam, its answers are given, can be given by all the faculty, madam. Radhakrishna garu,
వేరే
please.
వాళ్ళని అడిగే సార్.
So this is this has
John
both
can tell.
components. This has both components, inspiratory
Both
and
inspiratory and
expiratory,
expiratory.
and therefore it is a biphasic stridor. Here the obstruction will be at the level of glottis. What is important is to rule out a foreign body stuck there. Sometimes you will never know. Or if the history is long-standing, then you can look at subglottic stenosis or laryngeal pathologies, etc. But in any case, this is an indication for laryngoscopy. But however, rule out acute infections like epiglottitis or diphtheria and so on and so forth, because they are very, very important. Infections or obstructions has to be taken from the history.
Yes, sir. Very, very right, sir. So when we're looking at stridor, inspiratory is supraglottic. If there is expiratory stridor, it's the lower trachea or bronchi. And if it is biphasic, as Sir has said, it's glottic or subglottic. Severe croup, severe laryngomalacia, laryngeal vocal cord paralysis, laryngeal webs, hemangiomas, or any fixed obstruction like an external vascular compression, all of this can cause a biphasic stridor. Excellent.
Yeah.
Next clip, please.
So, we are going for 4th clip.
What are the advantages of benefits of this thing? And
This is
again, the patients who are walking, the patients.
Surendranath sir, you have to unmute, otherwise we think that is also a respiratory sound.
this is real stress buster.
I think this is the sound created by Dr. Sridhar.
So Dr. Sridhar,
Yeah.
some noise at
Yeah.
the background.
This
Not,
is a-
not in my, sir. Somewhere.
First, can you unmute Dr. Surendra, please? Must have got unmuted by mistake. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, if you can
This
play
is
one
a-
again very quickly.
mute
This
them.
can-
This
is taken for
this is
crying in a
actually-
child.
This looks like a grunt.
Yes.
Because there is a nagging at the end of it. The child is trying to create an auto peep and then open up.
Yes,
So
sir, you're
for me,
absolutely right,
it looks
sir.
like grunt, but I don't know the history. But Jijo and others, please, you also volunteer. He's silently, he's agreeing. Jijo?
I think, Dr. Sridhar, you have created this sound.
No.
Is it from a buffalo or a cow?
Dr. Sridhar is first one, madam, snoring.
What is the possibility?
So this is a
It's some
grunting
animal
say.
sound, no? Some
No,
animal sound.
All
No,
the
Jaka,
faculty
you should
and-
ask, is it snoring, and if so, from whom? So that we will know who is the most common roommate in all the conferences.
So this is the 5th clip, sir, please.
Is it the
So
wheeze?
this is the.
Yes, Dr. Sri Krishna.
Yes.
Please.
It looks like a
Excellent.
wheeze.
Yes, it's an
No, but,
expiratory wheeze.
No, not just the wheeze, it is polyphonic wheeze.
It's a polyphonic wheeze.
So there
Sir,
are
please enlighten us
frequencies
on the
and
types
therefore
of
it is
wheezes.
asthma only.
So,
Yeah.
so basically, Sarah said wheeze can be monophonic or polyphonic. A monophonic wheeze indicates a large airway obstruction either due to foreign body or any obstruction, whereas a polyphonic suggests multiple or diffuse airway involvement like asthma. Again, it can be, as the disease worsens, it can go from expiratory and it can also go to inspiratory and expiratory wheeze also. Monophonic is which is heard in the same intensity.
I'm
all
giving
over.
the next clip, sir, audio clip.
So this is part B, is the different coughs you can hear. There are two sounds
This
in
is
this one.
the audio. Yes.
This is pertussis.
Pertussis, whooping cough.
So can you play again, Dr. Sridhar?
I will just
Yeah.
will just hear.
I am. Yeah.
Yes.
The cough, particularly the cough.
Yeah, please.
So the initial part is stridor, but then you could see that barking cough in this child in the later part of the
Yeah.
video, and commonly what you see in proof. So this is a particular clip for the senior doctors who saw this condition in the past very frequently. Can
Yeah,
you explain
this
that?
is there is two things in this child. I don't know, Jaka, but history. What I would take from this is, if you say stridor and then this type of pertussoid cough, it may not be pertussis. It could be a migrating foreign body. One
Yes.
should be very careful. You know, it can cause a bit of stridor, but then moves down, up and down, and this is very common with phases of respiration. And I'm sorry, I may be wrong, but one should be cautious about migrating foreign body.
Sure, sir.
Jijo, you agree?
Can I go for next sound, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is sir, next sound, sir. So, yeah, great.
Yeah,
Sir.
whooping cough.
Yes, Dr. Jijo, you're absolutely right. There is a continuous fits of cough, and then there is a inspiratory whoop.
Whoop at the end of it.
Whoop at the end of it. So that's a whooping cough. Very excellent. Next one.
Yeah.
This is a chlamydial cough, staphylococcus. Probably atypical pneumonia, chlamydia. I don't know.
Can you play again?
Can you play because
eight, please?
Yeah, please. I will. So,
can you play 9 as well? That's a variant of this condition.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
So these two sounds
are of the same pathology.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Cough, sir.
Are different children, but with the same underlying pathology, sir. Yes, sorry, Dr. Jijo.
Functional cough, sir.
Yes. Excellent. This is a habit cough. In this, you see the cough having a particular frequency. So these children, they grow like a clock.
Very good.
And that the two variants can be, one can be like a severe honking or barking cough. That's one variant. The other thing can be soft, like child trying to clear the throat. So this is a habit cough, which you are seeing more and more frequently.
That the chlamydial would come like, you know,
Yes,
it's like very irritating. I'm sorry, I was misled by the first half.
Yes.
So this is the 10th clip, sir.
So these are auscultatory sounds. Part C, what you hear with the stethoscope.
Bronchial breath sound, sir.
So, I mean, again, it is difficult. Again, I acknowledge because this is the loudness of the sound. It's actually, can you play the next clip as well?
Yeah,
you know the difference between the two?
Sure.
First one is normal and second one is bronchial.
Yes. That's why I played both. And for any juniors, Dr. Jijo, can you tell them how to identify both of them?
So the expiratory and the inspiratory phase is going to be equal when you're having a bronchial breath sounds, which is classical when you get to the consolidation. While the other one, the intensity varies. The expiration though is normal. The second phase is not audible for us when we auscultate, sir.
Yes. So basically, the louder, isn't it? Bronchial breaths are louder, they're lower pitch, and you can both are equal intensity, the gap in between. Whereas in vesicular, the inspiratory component is longer compared to the expiratory. Thank you.
So this is audio clip 12.
Fine repetition, sir.
Yeah, great.
Absolutely. And Dr.
So
the next one.
Dr. Srinivas, can we say it if it's coarse or fine? Based on
That's why we'll make you listen 12th clip and 13th clip, then we can have the discussion. Yeah, this is, please. Yeah, please. Now
Last
we can.
one would be end inspiratory crepitations, which are typical of they're like fine creps that you would get in resolving pneumonia, small airway diseases, maybe even the cardiac edema and things like that. So you may get it because see, what is important in crepitations is bubbling is the one which produces the sounds, and in which phase of inspiration. With inspiratory, fine or coarse. Coarse means you can go for bronchiectasis, etc. So coarse or fine depends on, sometimes when we hear from here on Zoom, we may miss out, but it depends, like whether it's fine or coarse. We have to go closer to the in the stethoscope, it will be much more little. I think every audience can make out fine and coarse. It is very easy.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Is the 14th clip plural rub?
Oh, did you already play?
Sir, not played, sir.
13.
13th is coarse crackle, sir.
Not a plural rub. Okay.
Can you go back, play it for the benefit of Sridhar?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So last sound, sir.
This Dr. Radhakrishna, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, it's a plural rep, sir.
Okay.
Radhakrishna sir, without hearing the 14th clip
Yeah.
also.
So sir gave the answer before the
Seeing
question.
the 14th clip itself, he made the.
Okay.
without
I'm
asking
sorry,
me.
I'm sorry, I lost the link, but I'm rejoining again.
No issue, sir. So, really, thank you all the faculty members, and special thanks to Srinivas Jaka, who made these auscultatory sounds and live sounds from his own clinic and made the 14 clips, and he had submitted for us. And special thanks and appreciations to Srinivas Jaka, who made the things. And
I request to share the clip, share the video. This one, it will be helpful for us to teach the students, sir.
yeah,
Yes,
sure,
sir.
sure, sir. Sure, I'll in the DAB session, I'll our live
In
session.
fact, this video will be uploaded onto our IAP-TCP YouTube channel. So the entire
Dr. Sridhar or
Yes.
Dr. Jakka, I'm not sure, but they are very useful for us also and for our residents also.
We thought that it will be refreshing for all the faculty and the students also. And there was a special request from Himabindu Singh madam to
It
make
was a
this. So
brainstorming for us also.
that's true. Now you should give the feedback about how the sounds Srinivas.
Very nice, sir. Excellent one.
Very nice.
Himabindu madam, namaskar.
Yeah, and would like to inform everyone that this video will be available live on IAP-TCP's YouTube channel as well for viewing later. And please share this with all your students and postgraduates. There's nothing as good as hearing them with your stealth with the patient in front of you. If that can't happen because of the pandemic, this is as close as we can get. And this also underlines the difference of gear up sessions. No presentations, no long talks. Each speaker hardly spoke for 2 to 3 minutes, not more. And you find different questions for which answers were very tough. But yet we got newer insights. And at the end, a very different form of learning. And it took us seriously back to our undergraduate days. Undergraduate days wherein the professor used to ask us to come and listen with his stethoscope onto the patient. And half the time we were wondering, what is this sound? And no, it's a drive down the memory lane. Thank you all the faculty. And on behalf of IAP Twin Cities branch, heartfelt thanks to all the faculty who have joined us, Dr. Himabindu Singh, the chief organizer, for putting this up together. And make sure you spread this to others as well.
Thank you,
Over
Sri
to you,
Krishna.
Himabindu ma'am.
Yeah, just wanted to just close with saying huge gratitude to Radhakrishna sir. I hope he enjoyed the session, and his message as a guest of honor for today is very appropriate. And all the experts have done excellently, and both of you, Dr. Sri Krishna and Srinivas Jakka, took this interactions in a very, very, it was full of energy. Thank you. And that idea of having the sounds, I think the respiratory or the other sounds mixed with it was really, I hope it was very, very well taken. And as you rightly said, we've gone back to our old days and we blended with what is new in respiratory diseases. So big thank you on behalf of the PATS and the organizing team of this Gear Up and Cheer Up sessions. Have a good Sunday, and let's have a thumbs up before we leave. This is that tradition, mark of our Gear Up and Cheer Up sessions.
Whose idea was the name? Who gave the name Cheer Up and Gear Up?
Sir, myself. I don't know.
Nice name.
Of course, support of Dr. Surendra and everybody, sir. So can I request the host to please take one snap of all the our experts with their thumbs up? Or Sri Krishna, can you just take one?
I've taken it, doctor.
Yeah. Thank you. Please post in the group. It's a memory for us. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, each one of you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye, sir.
Thank you, Srinivas Jagas. Thank you, Sridhar. Excellent. It was both Sharu. Dr. Subramanian, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hima.
Dr. Jijo, thank you. Thank you so
ma'am.
much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Radhakrishna.
Good
sir.
efforts from Srinivas and Sri Krishna. Well done,
Yeah,
sir.
excellent. They were excellent, sir. Excellent.
Bye, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Srinivas Jakka, you're too good, both of you, Dr. RSV and Srinivas.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am. Look forward to the next episode.
Bye-bye.